Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast from Backlot Banter, where us four Backlot boys review every single Best Picture nominee for the calendar year 2024. That's right now. Today, we are going to be talking about Martin Scorsese's big-time movie, Killers of the Flower Moon, which came out a couple months ago, and we all watched in preparation for this, and I am excited to talk about it. I don't know about you guys, but I am excited to discuss this film, one that I mistakenly didn't catch when it was out in theaters and only watched for the first time in, yesterday.
On home video.
And Timo, I have to say, your cinephile card has absolutely been revoked because of that statement. I mean, you didn't go see the new Martin Scorsese movie in theaters.
In theaters, I missed out on that.
Go ahead and cut that baby up, tuck it in the trash.
Yeah, well...
Burn the house down.
Yeah.
Get rid of all the evidence.
Better late than never is what I say.
Right.
Now, before we talk about this film, this enormously long film, I think it's the longest film we are talking about for the Best Picture nominees of this year.
That's true.
We need to do a little housekeeping. Remind you of what we talked about on the last episode, because we reviewed American Fiction, a social issue movie of sorts, and, well, we had a lot to say about the film. It did not get the top score on our list. In fact, it got the bottom score on our list with a 7.5, putting it at spot number 5, as there are 5 films on the list. I will remind you real quick right now what the list looks like, since it's not so long. At the top is it is. At the top, spot number 1 is Past Lives, followed by Poor Things. Then there's The Holdovers, and then The Zone of Interest, and then at the bottom, as I said, American Fiction. So, what do you think about that list? Do you think it's right? Do you think it's wrong? Do you think we got to rearrange some of those middle films? Let us know in the comments. We appreciate everything you have to say. And now, I'll hand it over to Abram, who is going to give out extra appreciation for one of the commenters on a recent video of ours.
Yes.
I will. I want to very briefly read a comment here on our Holdovers review from at the cat indeed, who simply says, "Where's my weed, man?"
Now that's a good YouTube comment. We don't get a lot of YouTube comments on questions.
Yeah.
That's a classic. You're scrolling through the YouTube comments like, yeah, that's a YouTube comment.
I thought that was funny. So I just want to shout it out. But I wanted to read our friend at Abby Keg, real life friend, real life dungeon master Abby, left a really insightful analysis of Zone of Interest across 2 comments. I'm going to read the second one.
Okay.
Where Abby particularly says the following.
Sure.
My personal thoughts on that returning shot to Rudolph at the end of the film is that in some way the future is haunting him from the present, alongside this idea that he is in the process of creating history, terrible history that we will revisit and return to time and time again through museums and biographies and films and art that will, until now largely, give him the benefit of obscurity through the loss of detail. And he can only, as you guys point out, move forward through the past and takes actions as they come and as he chooses.
Very true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, very astute. There's a lot to chew on.
Gold star.
Yeah, there's a lot to chew on with that ending as we chewed on in the review.
I also wanted to read that comment because Zone of Interest and Killers of the Flower Moon, I think, are very similar films.
Quite similar. All films, about films about, genocide, the evil that can result from, humanity and white supremacy and so forth. So,
So I figured Abby, insightful as always, could tee us up for Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing seems that the more a Best Picture nominee of this year focuses on genocide, the less I like it. Because this is my second to bottom.
We want to do a plot summary?
We
all know this about.
Right past the plot summary.
We're shooting right past it.
Okay.
Well, frankly, if you're listening to this review, you know what the movie's about.
You've begun your thoughts. We will go back, but you've jumped the horse.
I had a joke to
A joke about genocide.
Absolutely, I love those. I think it's okay. But first time I watched it, I was intrigued because I think there's a pretty compelling mystery going on here. A mystery from one person's perspective, but not from the audience's perspective. And it's pretty interesting to see that be pulled through and wonder where it's going and which other parties are going to be pulled in or not. But second time around, boy, howdy, I felt none of the intrigue. I felt none of the drama. I knew it was coming, and it completely disinterested me. And I find that is the case with a lot of Martin Scorsese's movies for me. I think they are well made. I will not criticize the editing or the filmmaking or the performances or anything on the technical side, but from an engagement level, from a personal interest level, this one does close to nothing for me. I like the main performances, but it's just it's too damn long, man. I mean, sincerely, I would find this premise so compelling if it didn't repeat itself so many times. It had so many scenes that I can understand why they're included, but the overall package suffers so much from just going on and on and on. And even by the end, when you get to a courtroom drama, which is one of my favorite things on film, I am so checked out. I sincerely do not care so much about the characters that not even a courtroom drama and a clever ending can pull me back in. This is an okay film that suffers from Apple not wanting to tell Martin Scorsese, you need to cut this down a little bit, because they are Apple and they're just going to hand him $200 million, do whatever he wants to do. And I think it failed it creatively.
Okay.
Right. No, we want to do a plot summary, or just want to go right into thoughts?
I think we should have a plot summary.
Okay, sounds good.
Just for the sake of consistency.
Okay.
Sure. You want to take it, Tanner?
I'll take it.
You are Mr. Plot Summary, I feel. I think we should just give it to you.
Okay. Plot. Tanner, take it away.
So this film is set at the early 20th century in America, specifically in Oklahoma and Osage country. We follow particularly the arrival of our war hero Ernest Burkhart, who arrives.
Claps around for Ernest Burkhart, everyone.
Good guy all around, Ernest Burkhart, who arrives home from World War I to live and work for his uncle King William Hale, who is hatching a despicable plot, a genocidal plot, that is, to sort of wrest control of the oil money head rights that are in control of the Osage people, and control them either himself or put them in the controlling interests of the local and growing white population of the surrounding area. He employs his dolt of a nephew, Ernest Burkhart, to essentially marry one of the Osage Osage oil head right owners, Molly, and sort of he also employs him to carry out murders and assassination plots and destruction plots around town. And this ultimately, with the help of some moneyed interests from Washington, brings the FBI out to see who's doing these murders, as it were, as Jesse Plemons says. And it devolves from there. The plots are unraveled and consequences are lightly doled out, I would say, upon the ending of the film.
Yeah.
Nice.
Very nice, Tanner. Abram, what did you think?
I love the movie. I absolutely love Killers of the Flower Moon. It's not my favorite Scorsese film. I'm a normie, so my favorite is Goodfellas. It'll always be Goodfellas.
Yeah.
But I think that Killers of the Flower Moon, to me, is a deeply rewarding watch, because it is long, and I agree with you, Tucker, that the length is felt. But for me, the length isn't a detriment. It's sort of a challenge. This is a movie that I think really rewards my investment in it and my engagement, because I do think that the entire runtime, as I would like to get into, is necessary. And I find that as you get deeper and deeper into these characters in this world, because it's so filmically unimpeachable, in my opinion, you just sort of get captivated in this tapestry of the storytelling. And I think that the greatest tool in this movie's arsenal is its ending, wherein after this masterfully put on epic about the West at a time that we don't typically think about the West in, because we're in what year are we in? We're in
it sort of spans from like 1920 to about 1924, 25, I would say.
I mean, and the film ends in the 30s.
Oh, does it? Okay, yeah.
It's decades later than we typically think of the West.
Yeah.
So I think that you go through this journey with our characters, and then Scorsese indicts himself for telling the story. He indicts the audience for engaging in the story. And I think that it's this brilliant ending that completely recontextualizes this deep engagement in the story. So I think that on many levels, from a technical level, I think it's perfect. From a storytelling level, I think it's deeply enriching. And then I think that it's more provocative, in my opinion, than almost any of the other Best Picture nominees for me this year, even the ones that are quite similar in their subject matter.
Dimo?
Well, my thoughts on this film are kind of in two different places. I think that you're absolutely right that this really is Scorsese. Abram, you are absolutely right that Scorsese knows what the hell he's doing with this movie, and his artistic touch and choice is very evident. And I think of it kind of similar to The Irishman, but better. It's like
Sure.
it's got that grandiosity to it, the length, but
The
as-
girth.
the girth. As you say, Abram, this film is so tragic and is so somber and sad, and I think kind of it really does do a 180 with your Scorsese tropes, which are still there, but like you say at the end, the ending really twists them around and makes you feel, well, I felt quite horrible about what was happening the whole time this movie was happening, but at the
Mhm.
ending, it's just kind of you're really just forced to reckon with it, and I think that the story and the characters carry a lot of that like condemnation of what you're seeing and what you think is like good to view in film. The killings, the Scorsese stuff, like the brutality,
Mhm.
the extreme violence, the kind of couple different characters scheming together to kill other people and make a lot of money. Just that's what every Scorsese movie is about. Um, the filmmaking, I think, kind of does less to like bring me into that ending, like to bring me to that note as a, like a viewer. But you are right, Abram, that the just the filmmaking of this movie is excellent. It's not flashy. It's just like that really honed. It's like, dude, you've been making movies for so many years that you know exactly what type of shot is going to best convey the information, best convey the emotion, and you're not going to scream at me about the shot. You're just going to let me like be in the movie and be in the story and the characters. And so I appreciate that a lot. I think I'm gonna kind of work through a bit more of my feelings as we go through this review, because it is a complicated film. I have a lot that I like about it. There are some points that I kind of not so hot on, but by and large, I enjoyed it. Not my favorite Scorsese. Since Abram listed his, I think mine right now is Casino. I'm a Casino head, right? I really like that movie.
Cool.
It's quite a good one. But yeah, it's somewhere in there. I don't really make rankings, so like, where does it rank against the other Scorsese movies? I don't know. Casino's better, though.
Who's to say? Who's to possibly say?
Casino, Killers of the Flower Moon, Irishman. Those are the only three I will rank.
Okay. There you go. For the sake of getting into a more detailed discussion of the film, I'll just say that I find Killers of the Flower Moon to be a masterful work from Martin Scorsese as he's in this sort of like final phase of his career. It is a lot of a culmination of his previous work for me, while also seeming and feeling so different than his previous work. It is a lot more of a American lament. It is a lot more contemplative and less of a firing on all cylinders, snappily edited kind of thing.
Departed-esque kind of film.
Yeah, Departed-esque. We're not doing like Rolling Stones needle drops here to take us from scene to scene. We are hanging on scenes, just really soak in the evil nature of our characters, because this does follow the perspective, as lots of people have criticized about the film, the perspective of a white murderous man who is killing the family members of his wife, who he supposedly loves. And I'd like to get into that and sort of the questions that the film poses from that direction. But to sort of frame our conversation as well, as a Best Picture nominee, here are the films that are the nominations that Killers of the Flower Moon also racked up the Academy Awards this year. It was nominated for Best Original Score for Robbie Robertson, a posthumous nomination there. Thank you, Tucker, for helping me out with the pronunciation of that yesterday. I couldn't get it as I was trying to get it off the top of my head. Also nominated for Best Original Song for Washaze, or A Song for My People. Nominated for Best Achievement in Directing for Martin Scorsese, naturally. Best Actress in a Leading Role for Lily Gladstone. Best Performance by an Actor in a Supporting Role for Robert De Niro. Best Cinematography from Rodrigo Prieto. Best Editing from Thelma Schumacher. Best Production Design by Jack Fisk. And Best Costume Design by Jacqueline West.
10
noms.
one of those movies.
10 noms.
Yeah,
Killers
that's a
of the
lot.
Flower Moon.
One that spoke out to me, because I kind of like to start with this, is performance. De Niro,
Okay.
a longtime muse of Martin Scorsese, a character actor that appears over and over and over again. I really like Robert De Niro as W.K. Hale, William King Hale. He straddles this line of like he's got an outward persona and an interior persona, this character does. And I think that De Niro does a really excellent job of making that like outward persona his whole essence, his whole vibe. He's like, oh, I love the Osage. Oh, they're the greatest people in the world. Oh, here, let me help them out. But that interior persona, which is what Tanner talked about in the plot synopsis, is this like scheming, conniving, genocidal, like greedy bastard who it's like he just knows. De Niro just knows when to twist that little evil knob and to let the evil seep through his skin. And you're like, you just, it's so subtle. I think it's a really subtle, a really naturalistic performance that makes me question. I mean, for the first half of the movie, I will say, I wasn't so in the know of kind of like what exactly is going on. I'm like, okay, I know that the story of the Osage murders is that a lot of these Native Americans were killed, were murdered. And I can kind of guess that these people that we're following are into it. But during that beginning stage, you're just like, who are these people? What's going on? And I think De Niro is kind of my rock in this story, because I can clearly tell that he's just so much of a smarter character. His character is so much smarter than Leonardo DiCaprio's is. And so for me, I look to him for cues. I look to him for like, what should I think? But then as the film develops, I'm like, I don't want to think what this guy thinks. I think De Niro...
Because he also is like the guide into the film, because we're following Ernest Burkhart, who doesn't know shit about shit. And having him show up to his, I guess maybe childhood home, he's probably been there a few times, and having Hale like introduce him back into this culture and tell him what he needs to do and what he needs to learn and who needs to meet. You are put in the shoes of Ernest Burkhart, where it's like, I need to trust this guy because I don't know shit about shit. Ernest Burkhart doesn't know shit about shit, but he knows everything about everything. And W.K. Hale's like, oh, you got to go here. You got to do this. You got to read this book. You got to wear these clothes. Yeah. I know that guy. I know this guy. And it's very interesting how he is both extremes of this film in terms of the outward persona he puts on, and frankly, what most of the screen time of him in terms of performance is the most lovable guy ever, the most charitable guy ever, buying ponies for dancing little girls and like putting his hand on everyone's shoulder in their time of need, and everyone always coming to him. And he does a great job at that with, frankly, and it just points to this guy being like so like polar opposite in his internal self versus outward self, just, and through De Niro's performance, just all smiles and opening his arms to everyone and like feels and looks the genuine part of being as caring as he can be. But then watching those layers be peeled away and be like, what the hell? Like, what the fuck is this? that he actually is the one orchestrating.
What the hell?
Yeah, what the hell?
There we go. Very good.
He's the one orchestrating all the murders and is the root of basically all the evil in this town. I think it's a really interesting juxtaposition that Robert De Niro is able to just put on both sides of the coin.
I'll throw in a quick one. I think this is kind of an atypical character for De Niro too. It's I'm used to seeing him being that like hard ass kind of like guy that's bad that I respect, and this is kind of different than that.
Sure.
I mean, the character of King is very interesting to me in that he represents a sort of entitlement throughout the entire film that I think is obviously extremely nefarious, and I think gets to the heart of what the film is trying to say in some ways. And I want to particularize that later, but as it relates to performance, I think that the way that De Niro is able to portray this largely unwavering belief that King holds that he is not only in the right, but that the Osage are indebted to him is very powerful. I think about even at the end of the film when he's being challenged by Ernest, who says, I'm going to testify against you. His commitment, King's commitment to, I built them their roads. There might be a little bit of a controversy when I'm out of here, but they are going to love me still. I think that this self-aggrandizing, hyper-entitled persona is portrayed very well by De Niro. And I also think it's a great performance for De Niro because on a sort of affectation level, King is very Trumpian.
Yes.
And De Niro's very, very loud, outspoken hatred of Trump,
Yes.
I think.
I didn't pick
Colors
up on
the
that.
character.
That's really
Yes.
good one, Herb. Good one.
A great example for me of this is when Jesse Plemons is talking to him when he's getting shaved, and he says that he was sent down here by J. Edgar Hoover.
I don't know him.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of Trump like bragging he's a great person and all this stuff.
These people love me, the good people, but the sickly people, they're sickly people, and the time is going. The time is going, folks.
And I think, to me, that performance and those echoes are one of the many reasons why I think this film is very good, similar to Zone of Interest at bringing this story out of time in a lot of ways and making it feel like less of a period piece and more of a period set but perennially important film and story with perennially relatable archetypes.
Yeah, of course.
And so I agree with you guys. I think De Niro's excellent.
My favorite
movie.
modern archetype is the guy with explosives. That I go to for my explosives.
AC Kirby. I mean, for my thoughts on De Niro, since we decided to start with him, which I think is a very interesting place to start because
It's kind of an atypical place for a Killers of the Flower Moon review to start.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Are we typical reviewers?
No!
He is the embodiment of the evil, I would say, of the white supremacist sort of attitudes that are prevalent and run throughout the town, which I believe is called Fairfax. I think there's a couple towns around this area, but I think we spend a lot of our time in Fairfax, Oklahoma. And for that reason, I find it a pretty unique challenge for De Niro to channel all of that, all of the hate and all of the hate and resentment, and yes, Abram, the entitlement. I think it all comes across in his performance. And to note, what you were talking about, Tucker, how he has this outer shell where he's shaking hands and he's kissing babies and he's opening a ballet school. It is this fascinating character archetype where he is so convinced, perhaps even convincing himself, that I have done good things for my community, and these people love me. And he's invited to all these tribal functions of the Osage, and he says,
he doesn't feel out of place there, which I think is a really interesting element of how he is a keystone of the Osage culture in this meeting of the two cultures and how they clash. He is that middle ground. He speaks their language fluently and has known them all since they were children, and they all come to an entire need. And so when he's one of the only white people sitting in their tribal room when they're talking about what they're going to do and the plights of their people and how the white people are coming in and putting a blight on them, and he's just sitting there yeah, well, that's right. And he doesn't feel out of place.
I feel like he does feel out of place, though, as do all of the white people in those scenes. I mean, I think that you can feel what's so special about King as a character, about Hale as a character, is that you can feel him sort of forcibly taking the reins, but from behind the scenes. He's especially in that scene that we're talking about, when he's I'd like to put up $1,000, and also if you have any tips on the investigation, they have to go through me. He's he tries to slide himself, assert himself in all of these situations. And that is why I feel that he does such a fantastic job of being the embodiment of this racial avarice that runs through the town, is that he will plot and backstab and lie and murder and do it all while shaking your hand and smiling to your face.
Reminds me of some real life archetypes. I think Scorsese is trying to make us think about the types of people that we encounter in the real world with these here double crossers, these two-faced characters in this film.
Mm-hmm.
I want to point out a particular moment from Lily Gladstone's character of Molly Kelly, wherein she's not fooled. Because I agree with you, Tanner. I think that King is unable to, through any way other than leveraging his material power, integrate himself into the Osage community. And in the moment where Molly and Ernest are having dinner together, their kind of first date that we see on screen.
The one that spawns the iconic Killers of the Flower Moon image.
Yeah, sitting at the table.
The promo image. Yes.
Molly asks Ernest, "Are you afraid of him?" And Ernest says, "My brother Byron, of course I'm not." And she says, "No, your Uncle King." And I think that Molly knows. And that's why I think Molly is such an interesting character in the film, kind of to bring her into conversation now. Also, she's very stoic. And I think Lily Gladstone's performance, I'll just put it out here, the only reason I'm glad that Greta Lee didn't get nominated is I don't have to put my two beautiful queens against each other.
Fair.
Because for me, Lily Gladstone is the easy best leading performance of the year for me personally, because she embodies a sort of all-knowing stoicism in the narrative, wherein she is both above the white people around her on a sort of like a posture level, but is also powerless against them in a lot of ways. And I really like this idea of Molly as somebody who sees through King, but is ultimately powerless to really do much about it. As we learn through the narrative, the troubles she goes to even try to get to DC because she doesn't have free control over her money, for example. But I think of her in the context of a scene like when Ernest is driving her away from the street race, and he's starting to kind of try to riz her up, and she just stops it. I think that's really interesting, whether it's an aside in her own language or just sort of pumping the brakes on Ernest. I think she is such a strong force in the narrative because of Lily Gladstone's exceptional performance that I think she's the character. If we're talking about King might get you into the narrative, I think it's to carry a character of Molly and the sort of small expressions on her face, her questions that begin to early on prompt you to realize that things are not right.
I think it's her character that like keeps me going throughout this film. I think that her character's her own personal tragic story. I think really through her illness, which is a major part of this film. And we don't really see like illness, I think, depicted a lot on screen. And I have some questions about it. I still don't think I've figured out everything about her illness, and certainly not her character. But I in those later parts of the film in which she's basically being poisoned by DiCaprio and by De Niro, like they're not curing her. I kind of don't exactly get what's going on with like the diabetes and the insulin.
They're poisoning her.
Yeah,
they give him the extra vial of like, make sure to put this in her medicine.
Yeah. And it's,
which, by the way, you don't usually do when you're trying to cure someone.
Yeah,
you don't add the extra special sauce to slow them down.
We're just slowing her down a little bit.
And that's all we're doing.
That like tragedy is kind of what was bringing me into the story in the middle of it. I was really, I think, emotionally attached to this character. I wanted to see her at least be happy. And once the kind of conflict that arises gets going and has some steam to it, then I'm just really interested in seeing the marital relationship play out between basically the two opposite forces of the film, DiCaprio and what's her name? Oh, I feel like it's
Gladstone.
Lily Gladstone
as Molly.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with you in terms of that middle chunk of the film really resting on her shoulders. And I think what is interesting about the pacing of this film is it does shift quite heavily in terms of how much screen time certain characters are getting, where the energy and plot of the film is. It definitely changes from Ernest being introduced to being more integrated into the culture, and then there's sort of the rom-com element sort of in the first third there, and then more murder plot stuff, and then the court case and stuff at the end. But in the center, Lily Gladstone giving a performance that is just so simple and genuine is what kept me going absolutely throughout. And I certainly felt a major loss to my engagement in the film when she does become so ill that she basically has no screen time, which of course is a function of the plot, and I understand it, but especially as she is worrying about the deaths of her sisters, which are one of the big forces in this film. Emotionally, her needing to set up funeral plans and figure out what to do with the money, but you can see on her face that she is just obviously totally shell-shocked from the grief and the tragedy of everything that she's going through. But Lily Gladstone has this look on her face that's almost not a look, that I think is so powerful, where she opens her eyes incredibly wide and just stares into the person, into the film, into nothingness. And her eyes are so big and so deep that it's just like, I can see through the like darkness of the irises of her eyes into her body and just be like, holy shit.
Like she might be they kind of be like the windows to the soul, maybe.
Almost. I wouldn't go that far.
Okay.
But we're getting there.
Okay.
If there ever were windows to a soul, it would be her just blanket out into the camera, which I think is really powerful.
Tucker, I want to thank you for bringing this up, because Lily Gladstone does some like S-tier face acting in this. Especially, I mean, the Scorsese kind of puts this in the plot, or I guess more accurately, Eric Roth puts this in the story, in the dialogue of the film, wherein Hale sort of warns Ernest that, like, now these people don't talk a whole lot, so you don't, and that you might want to like talk to fill in the space, to fill in the silence. And Molly and Lily Gladstone are exactly that. Like, she has relatively light dialogue for her screen time and for her importance to the story. But she fills that in and colors that in with just some, like, these faces that can say almost 1,000 words more than what can be written on the page. It's the moments where she is seeing her sister Anna's body down, you know, when they put her in the wooden box and start like chopping her up to clearly get rid of the evidence, but they're looking for the bullet and all this stuff. It's the absolute dread and horror on her face, seeing her older sister get butchered in front of her. And then there's moments like that Tucker was talking about. Or one of my favorite scenes, and this is sort of like a juxtaposition in the film, is I think it's about maybe an hour and a half into the movie. It's when they decide to, or maybe it's probably longer. It's when the Osage decide to send representatives to Washington to get the FBI down. And we get, for the first time in the film, a very key moment. It's when Molly Burkhart gets to narrate the story. Narration very important to Martin Scorsese's film, of course. Very rarely does it come from a female character, a female perspective. And I think he does a great job in forefronting this and giving her just some rager dialogue to go along with her face, just sort of like panning the crowds of white people getting off the train. And the dialogue there is...
Yeah, that's a really powerful...
Hate surrounds my heart. I tried to guard my heart from the hate that sort of tries to invade it. And I think that's like the key to Molly's character, ultimately. You might be questioning, like, why does she get with Ernest? Does she love him? Does she really care about him? She calls him a coyote. Her sisters warn her that he's out for money. And does she really love him? I think that she and many of the other Osage characters resemble just human decency that is lacking from a lot of our white characters. You know, that they choose to look for the best of people, as many of us do, and that faith is ill-placed in the white settlers that are coming to their town. To take over their region and kill them and steal their money. And that scene, that dialogue is a fantastic example of that. How she's talking about hate surrounds my heart and I try to shield it, but ultimately, like, it still bleeds in and I still look at these people with hate and I wish them to get out of my town and all this stuff. Like, it's those moments where Lily Gladstone gets to really bring out the facial acting of her presence in the film, and delivers some really key dialogue that's important for understanding the film.
I want to also shout out that specific sequence for being an incredibly well-edited one, because I recall very vividly this sequence and watching it and hearing the narration, and we see basically a point of view shot of it's Lily Gladstone walking through the train station, and we see all these people that are just like looking at her, and they all have, you know, there's lots of different gazes that they give her, but the narration kind of clues us in, except that there's no reverse shot. They just like don't let us see what is her facial reaction. How is she reacting in this moment to these people.
Well, it's also almost unclear what is actually happening. in
Yeah.
that cut. Because, okay, you know that she's going to be leaving, but it is sort of just this ethereal shot of the camera floating through the crowd and people looking at the camera. And you're right, it's probably like a 30+ second shot, and then you do get a cut after that back to her face. And so
it's just at the right moment.
The fact that it goes for so long left me wondering, especially the first time, what am I looking here? Because it's like the frame rate is slightly slowed down, and the camera movement is like gently swaying back and forth. It's like I don't even know really what I'm looking at here.
Yeah, it's like,
believe it or not, Thelma Schoonmaker might be a good editor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's disconnecting. It makes me think about what the narration is saying. Makes me think about how it applies to what I'm seeing, and then it's like the film kind of holds back its meaning. It is like, hey, okay, you figure it out, viewer. You figure it out in this little moment. We'll give it to you. You just got to figure it out first. And I think that is hard to do. It's much easier to just tell people what you're trying to say in a film.
I had a question for you guys, sort of along these lines of intuiting things out of the narrative. There's a number of exchanges between Osage characters that have no subtitles.
Yes.
I'm curious what you guys make of that.
To me, it's just, and this has always been the case when we get, a non-English language being spoken in a American film that is not subtitled. It's an active choice on the part of the director to not clue us in to what is being said there. It can often be, a lot of times, maybe we are supposed to be in the perspective of a character who does not understand that language, or it can maybe be literally a private, closed moment between these two characters that really either the director wants us to just take in the emotion and feel the weight of the words that they're saying, even if we can't understand it, or, just purely be a moment between these two characters that maybe the audience isn't supposed to be clued into at all.
Mm-hmm. For me, I usually never watch films with subtitles at home. I don't choose to turn them on. And so for the first 45 minutes of this film, I was sitting there kind of wondering, like, okay, are some of these lines being translated or not? And I was living with the idea that not really. No, the film just kind of wants us to hear some of these words and put some meaning to them and kind of learn a little bit of the language so that we can just kind of intuit meaning. But after a while, I thought, but what if there are subtitles for these parts? So I turned the subtitles on, and then I was clued into the fact that, yes, it is very selective about what you're understanding, what you're not. And I take the same position or idea that Tanner does, that it's all about perspective. Whose mind you're kind of in that moment is who you want to either see or not see the subtitles relating to. I thought it was pretty well done. I guess it's kind of like, well, maybe I missed some dialogue at the beginning of the film because I didn't have any subtitles on, and it was subtitled. Although, if I want to be logical about it, I would assume that our main character, Leonardo DiCaprio, knows no Osage at the beginning, and so we should be clueless at the beginning of what is being said. But as he actually shows that he learns the language and he speaks a bunch of it in the later parts of the film, then we should be clued into just being able to understand what characters are saying to each other.
Yeah, I was just curious for your thoughts on that, because it was something I really thought a lot about on the second viewing. I think that language is deeply important to this film. There's a couple dimensions of its importance, I think. There is a moment that you actually mentioned earlier, Tanner, wherein Molly and her sisters in the Osage language are speaking about Ernest and Ernest's intentions.
I love that scene of them. They're talking about guys. They're talking about guys. They're like, look at that one. Look at this one. Look at that one. My husband fucks good, whatever.
Yeah, and they also even talk about Rita's husband, who's literally sitting right next to them and is unable to understand what they're saying. But this scene is subtitled. And I think there's an interesting tension as an audience member between wanting to know what is being said in these exchanges, because they are very rich, but not being allowed to in some ways. And I think that what the film is trying to illustrate, in my opinion, is the deep power that language has, and the ways that language can be then taken or imposed upon, because we do then have characters like Ernest come to learn the Osage language, and then Molly is without this sort of dimension of her character and culture that she has away from people like Ernest. He then enters into it. I also want to talk about a very, very commonly cited line in the film, which is that we just want to slow down Molly. What they're saying is that they want Ernest to, over time, poison and kill Molly. But they use the word slow down. And it reminds me a lot of the news outlets as of late reporting on the deaths of Palestinian minors instead of children. And there's a deep rhetorical power to how you use these certain words. So I think that when you have your white characters talking about slowing down people, and then you have your white characters also learning the Osage language and then encroaching into this space that they used to not be allowed in, and then as an audience member, you're kind of brought to realize this contrast between, as some Osage scenes are subtitled and some aren't. I think the film is hyper aware in trying to tell its audience that the ability to understand language is key to the oppression and sort of understanding of a genocide like this.
Yeah.
I think that it's interesting that you bring up the phrasing of the poisoning and giving Ernest these instructions that he doesn't clearly understand, because to me it was much more phrasing on, I guess, a writing level on Eric Roth and Martin Scorsese's part. You might be right that it is sort of mirroring that, or maybe that's just your mind putting things together. But I think it is relevant. But for me, that scene more spoke towards, I think, my favorite part of this movie and the element where I found it to be most engaging by far, which is the relationship and romance between Molly and Ernest Burkhart, and the way in which words are chosen speaking to Ernest in order to not upset him, because their relationship to him rolls so deep. And they tell him, we're just going to slow her down, because they don't want to tell him, we're poisoning your wife, because that would upset him, and he'd be like, what the fuck? Because Ernest Burkhart is as much of a dumbass and as much of a genocidal maniac he essentially ends up being. He really cares about his wife. He is a wife guy through and through. And if these schmunk ass doctors were like, we're gonna give you this vial, and about a year she'll be dead, Ernest Burkhart would not take that well, because even though he is killing her and is directly contributing to the deaths of almost every one of her family members for monetary gain, he still deeply cares about Molly. And the way that dynamic ebbs and flows across the film, and you see their connection ebb and flow in terms of how much they care about one another, how much Molly knows that he is behind this or not. I think that is one of the best elements of the film, and it's very clear through the word choices of other characters and through the performance of Leonardo DiCaprio and Lily Gladstone. Their relationship is complex and deep and flawed and nuanced.
Tucker, thank you for bringing this up, because obviously this is a talking point around the film, and a deep question that I think the film poses is, does Ernest love Molly? And your definition of love may vary here, but I think it's important to bring into conversation a comment that was made by one of the Osage cultural advisors on the film, and if I forget his name, and I apologize, but it was sort of a miniature discourse on film Twitter, as it were, at the premiere of this film, where he was talking about Martin Scorsese, a white man making this film, and he says this film is ultimately ends up being from the perspective of Ernest Burkhart, who was complicit and even carried out murders of Molly's family members and members of her community, and he said that isn't love. It's beyond abuse. And the film ultimately sort of poses this question, maybe asks you to believe that, yes, Ernest does love Molly. And I think it's a very important question that the film poses, is, can he love her, truly love her, and still carry out these acts? How stupid is he versus how willingly complicit is he? Is the real question that I think Scorsese and the screenwriters are asking you.
Yeah, that all comes to a head in the courtroom drama section of the film right at the end, in which Molly Burkhart has gotten better. She's gone to the hospital. They've given her probably real insulin, And then she asks in like a court back room, she asks
at the end of the
Ernest,
film.
at the end of the film, like, okay, like, do you love me? Because he professes on the stand that, like, no, this was not a plot. Like, no, I actually loved her. And then she says, well, what was in the vials? And you get that moment in which he says insulin. He affirms the lie that was told to him. It both, I guess, solidifies Ernest's dumbassness. It makes him more stupid because he either chooses to be ignorant and be blissful about what he was doing, or he just actually didn't know. I think I fall more on the former side, that he is just blissfully unaware of, because, well, part of my whole deal with this, like, insulin and the diabetic situation is that I kind of don't really know the medical facts of, like, if you have someone who's diabetic for so many years and they don't like have insulin, which is the thing that fixes that, what does the body do when you suddenly start receiving that? And so part of my confusion, I think, in that whole sequence kind of comes from this, like, I'm like finding myself wading deep into my own lack of medical knowledge. So I guess luckily Scorsese does put the very obvious contaminants in that whole solution. I think that the question of love is really, really huge in this film. Like, can you love someone and also kill all their family? You know, I don't think so. I think that this film comes down pretty harshly against Ernest, and, you know, is saying that, well, either he loved her and he got used, or he used her.
Yeah.
It's a provocative question, because I as a viewer do not see their relationship as one of love.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting how often the film plainly depicts Ernest's clear complacency in the plot.
Yeah.
A great example is when he is to go to Blackie Thompson and have Blackie Thompson kill Bill and Rita. And he very openly explains that plot. He also, I believe this is after the death of Anna, when Anna's body is taken to be put into the casket, he tells the white person who runs the funeral home, don't take her jewelry this time. And when he's with Blackie, he sees the jewelry that came from Anna that was taken by going and grave robbing her grave.
Yeah.
We see very obviously, with really no shade of subjectivity, that Ernest does know what he is doing and recognizes what is being done by others. I think what this then invites is, can cognitive dissonance allow him to see himself as a loving husband, despite the fact that he doesn't know what he is doing? Whether we want to say that he knew he was poisoning her or not, I think there's plenty of other examples in the narrative where he knows that he and his family are pivotal in the systematic annihilation of this family.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes him such an interesting character, is that because we are presented to him as someone who is so unknowing of everything in the culture and is so indoctrinated by Hale to do this and say this and believe this, it is hard to tell. And I think that's what part of why this movie is as compelling to me as it is, because watching him have maybe the most cognitive dissonance that a movie character ever has, I think is important, and why I still ultimately choose to believe that he does truly love Molly is because through all of these actions and through the performances of both Lily Gladstone and Leonardo DiCaprio, there's nothing to me that indicates that, other than a few moments of him near the end of the film potentially questioning the origins of his love to Molly, that he ever does not truly believe that he loves her and will do anything for her, to the point where, and this is not something that people do in normal relationships, even as committed as it can be, killing family members and poisoning and doing these things. But Leonardo DiCaprio's performance, I think, is 100% totally committed, and why it sells me on Ernest Burkhardt's love to that he cares a lot about her and is willing to learn this language and tell the other people to step outside when she's having a hard time and be there like at her shoulder in every moment and always be asking, how is she doing? How is she doing? How is she doing? Worrying about his family or his children that he clearly cares so much about. It is that cognitive dissonance that makes this a fascinating film and makes Ernest Burkhardt an interesting character, because he is doing both simultaneously. And I think both are equally true in his mind because he is an indoctrinated character. I think that Ernest Burkhardt knows on a certain level that what he's doing is obviously not right, but he's also the kind of person that goes out and spends a bunch of money and robs a guy at gunpoint just for fun, and from what we see, never thinks twice about it. Like, he obviously has a different skew of morality. And so once he's been so indoctrinated into his brother and his uncle and every man around him being like, this is just what we do. Like, this is just how it has to be. And Hale being like, yeah, it's going to be better in the long term. Don't you want things to be good for your children in the future? Don't you want things to be good for me? You care about me, right? The fact that he is so indoctrinated into that makes me believe that the cognitive dissonance can exist, in both that he can truly love her and recognize what he's doing is wrong in a tiny bit, but the other part is just like, I think he believes that what he's doing is ultimately good, not necessarily for everyone around him, because he's killing people and he's ruining people's lives, but for him, his uncle who he cares about, his wife who he cares about, and his children who he cares about.
I think the children is the most important part about that. He emphasizes that over and over and over again, that he's like, the money, he doesn't really say the money's coming to me. He says the money's going to my children. And he uses that he pushes back against Hale sometimes and it seems that there is a little bit of conflict between the two characters, in that Hale basically just wants all the money to flow to him, and DiCaprio is kind of trying.
He does love that money, sir.
No, Leo loves the
money.
He's trying to kind of like steer this whole plot more in his favor by setting up his family down the road, which means killing his wife. But in his own, I guess, twisted self-justification for all of this, I think he believes that it will benefit his children, even
Absolutely.
though how in God's green earth could that benefit his children? It can't. It simply just cannot benefit them in any way.
From my perspective on this, and I'll spin this out into a larger discussion on Ernest Burkhardt as a character overall in the film. I land on the point of Ernest does not truly love Molly. And this is a trite thing that actually does have its roots in a lot of like rom-com, rom-dram. He loves the idea of Molly, but he doesn't love her like person. He doesn't see her as an equal. He doesn't see her as, another human person. He loves her because he's like, oh, that's my wife. I love her and I care for her and yada, yada, yada. Because true love obviously comes from a place of, understanding the person and understanding what is important to them and how your actions impact them and as a human equal. Ernest Burkhardt doesn't have that. He chooses not to have that because he can distance himself from the actions that he does. He's a fucking idiot criminal at the end of the day. And I don't think that he can truly have that love for a person and carry out the acts that he does. And to that point of him being a dumbass criminal throughout the entire film, I find Leo's performance so fascinating here because it's unlike any character he's ever played before.
Yeah,
he's peeling away any semblance of like suaveness, especially from roles that he had, 10, 15, 20 years ago. In more recent years, maybe he is taking on a more knowledgeable role. Think of things like Don't Look Up, for example, where he does have a sense of he has a sense of intelligence about him in a lot of the characters that he's playing. Ernest Burkhardt is the complete opposite of that. He is, as I said in the plot description, adult through and through. There to be manipulated, and I think in relativity sort of heighten the intelligence of King Hale. But ultimately, I think King Hale is also a stupid character, as people point out, especially in like the third act of the film, when he's just like killing this guy, killing that guy, organizing this murder, organizing that murder, and someone's like, you're overexposing yourself, King. You're getting your neck out there too much. You're gonna get caught. And he's like, I got to do what I got to do. I think there is a fascinating incompetence around a lot of the characters in this film, especially a lot of the murderers, the criminals for hire. And Ernest Burkhart and Leonardo DiCaprio's performance is like the centerpiece of that, because he is so ultimately entertaining and oftentimes laughable to watch him get through these scenarios. I think particularly of the interrogation from the FBI, when he's just kind of they just know that if they tire him out, he'll just say whatever they need him to say. So they do that.
Yeah.
Well, they torture him. Yeah.
They torture him.
They beat him.
They beat him. They torture him. They stick hot nails through his fingers or whatever. I don't know.
Brendan Fraser, when he shows up, a quick aside. Oh my God. That one shot where he stands up and is like, ah, like, great. Oh my God.
This man is my client.
Like,
I demand to speak to my client.
I love that moment. I love that moment. He's so good in that moment.
I just wanted to shout out DiCaprio's performance further, and I do think that it's ridiculous that he was not nominated for Best Actor.
Sure.
In my opinion. Because, to your point, Tucker, I think that there's two key moments where he's overcome with emotion that does illustrate to me that on some level he does care for Molly. And I think one of them is when before the poison has been introduced into the whole insulin side of things, he's giving, or the doctors come to give Molly her first shot, and she rejects them. And he talks about how no one will ever hurt you when I'm in front. I think that because
I want to hurt you.
I think that he's able to in some way trick himself into believing that nothing else matters. It only matters that I will protect you. And he probably in some level thinks that he is protecting her.
Totally.
But the other moment I really love is when he's watching from the window. I think this is as the plot to kill Bill and Rita is about to unfold. He's watching from the window, and then he's called back to bed by Molly. And then she says, I need you here. And then they embrace, and then they go to have sex. And he's like, oh, you're going to wake up the kids now. You're going to wake up the kids. And he's got this sort of joyous, like mischievous energy about him that I think is really incredible. And the fact that he's able to play that dimension of the character up is, I think, is why you believe and want to interrogate this idea of whether or not he loves Molly, because he is so strong in those moments that it sometimes as a viewer makes you forget all the other stuff he's doing. But I think this
another one of those moments for me is right after the explosion at Bill and Rita's house, in which we see he goes over there and then he picks up Rita's dead body, which has also been severely disfigured by the explosion, and it's a horrible, gruesome scene. And he talks about his experience in war. I think that the kind of the war backstory comes full frontal here, when he kind of makes fun of guys for having PTSD, for having shell shock, and then comes back to his own house, and his whole family's in the basement, and Lily Gladstone's character asks him, is like, whose house was it? And all he can do, even though he knew he didn't need to leave the house to find this out, but because he went there and he saw what really happened and saw the destruction that he enabled, all he can do is he's just got this very wide-eyed, very blank stare, and he's just kind of like shaking his head. And Molly understands that. Boom, she knows all the information that she needs to know, and it sends her into this amazing acting moment, horrible character spiral. It's at that moment where I think that there is a big amount of cognitive dissonance being shown on DiCaprio's face when he is like in horror. He's in total shock of what he just saw. Yeah, but dude, you caused it.
It's like disliking the Subway sandwich.
My brother in Christ, you blew up the house.
I want to take it to a higher level. If I
Here we go.
Okay,
we're taking the helicopter up. The altimeter is ticking up.
Go towards the end of this film.
Yeah,
sure. Okay.
I can actually bring the end of the conversation right now, frankly.
Okay. I have like a dozen more things I want to talk about.
Well, no, I got a lot more I want to say about the film.
Movie.
But what I want to propose is that it doesn't really matter if Ernest Burkhart loves Molly or not.
Right.
What matters, in my opinion, is that Ernest Burkhart and King Hale and Byron and everybody believe they can have both. Believe they are entitled to both.
Yeah.
They're entitled to the love and they're entitled to the position in society, but they are also not to be, it doesn't matter that they're killing to get there. It doesn't matter that they are imposing themselves physically, culturally, in every possible sense of imposition, imposing themselves on these people. And I think that this does connect, and I'll talk about it vaguely, to this notion that Scorsese himself posits on screen, that a belief in the American frontier myth, or a belief in American individualism, or a belief in a lot of American ideology, the creation myth requires a rewriting and a dissonance inherently. The same way it requires a dissonance to
in like a literal one-to-one sense. Like it's the same. You need to do the same realization that about real history, which this film actually is real history. It's based on real true things that happened. You need to realize that
Ernest Burkhardt biopic. Should just call it Ernest.
The book is called the book is called The Killers of the Flower Moon, the Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI. So it's a real historical document.
I would have called it Ernest Scared Stupid.
Yeah.
But before we get away from Timo's point,
we're reeling back in.
Yes.
The idea that the American West and that the American nation is born out of the killing of Native Americans.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. That there was a genocide of enormous scale in this country that no one fucking cares about, that no one talks about. And that this is a movie that is at least attempting to make you think about the idea that there were people here before white people showed up. And that
William King Hale, towards the end of the film, says, people forget, they don't care. It just becomes another everyday tragedy.
Yeah, and he's saying that to excuse his actions. He's using that as a justification for the horrible stuff that he's doing, but he's also right.
Yeah.
And that's why I think this movie is so potent, because it forces you to sit with characters who illustrate the sort of intentionally separated cognitive dissonance in forcing you to ponder in your own life and understanding of history and contemporary history, as I already talked about Palestine as an example,
right? That
we too ignore and forget willfully and very quickly and want to have A without recognizing A's cause. And the reason that the Scorsese thing is so doubly powerful is because it also interrogates us as viewers wanting to enjoy this as entertainment.
Yeah. I think that...
I will say the reason why it succeeds is that is this little tag scene that Scorsese gets to so juicily and deliciously deliver like the literal last lines of the film.
I want to get to it, but Tucker, you go ahead.
I think it's very similar to the modern ending in Zone of Interest, in that I think that the cognitive dissonance that's showing something more modern and more current to what we know as current American culture of put on a show and having it be a thing with product placement and having there be a big band
at the end of the movie.
Underscoring the crazy moments in the narrative of like bah, 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 with the band in the background. That I think is a very good example of what you're talking about what this movie serves as, is to, for me as a viewer, and I think the intention of the creators, to push this into your mind that this actually wasn't that long ago, and look how much we've already forgotten about it. This was less than 100 years ago. All this was taking place.
About 100 years ago,
let's check history. That's a tiny little fraction of history. And it feels like because time and culture has progressed so quickly since then. Obviously, we're much younger people. We're more divorced from that time. But because we're seeing people driving around in old school cars and riding horses and wearing old clothes and stuff, our mind is like, oh, dog, that was forever ago.
Oh, that was 500 years ago.
They don't even have phones. But then when we see the radio play and in the dialogue, it is forced into our minds that we have forgotten about this, that it because it's a more modern thing, we're forced to reconcile. We've forgotten about it in a relatively short period of historical time. I mean, frankly, within the life of someone like my great grandmother, who I knew, it I think is one of the more interesting elements of this, of forcing you to reconcile that the American history, as we know it, is very young, and this is contemporary American history relative to even the history of just America.
Mm-hmm.
The radio drama at the end of the film is probably my favorite ending of the year, for sure, of 2023, a year of films with great endings.
I might agree.
I think it is.
I might agree with you. I think that it's so good. It's so perfect. I don't know what else.
Such a brilliant tag on the film, and also a brilliant meta recognition from Scorsese as a director, making this film and making basically every film in his filmography. It is an indictment of the true crime drama, of the true crime, like, industrial complex that has only grown in recent years.
Do not get me started about that.
An admission on Scorsese's part that he indulged in it. He indulged in it for 3.5 hours, and we just watched it. And it is a peeling back the curtain of the artifice. It is, we look at something that, as Tucker mentioned, like, seems so quaint to us. The Lucky Strike presents, with all the sort of Foley things live there, in all the characters reading the lines, including
how much blood was going towards your nether regions in that moment.
Yeah,
Foley being shown
live
a Best
Foley.
Picture nominee,
including
radio drama in a Best Picture nominee.
Yeah. Jack White is there, by the way. Just a quick thing. It was like, okay, Jack White's there for some reason. Anyway, when Scorsese himself comes out to read the eulogy of Molly Burkhart and says there was no mention of the murders, he is telling us that how these things get painted over, whitewashed, and how quickly these things can be forgotten. By the end of this woman's life, they did not feel that the events that transpired only years earlier, maybe a decade earlier at most, were not worth mentioning in her obituary. The things that she was a key part of were not worth mentioning. And yeah, and again, the radio drama is a whole thing about Scorsese, like, especially in this film, sort of like peeling away the entertainment, the artifice, and the visceral enjoyment that comes with seeing people get shot in the head on screen and what have you. Mm-hmm. All the murders in this are very blunt, very just like presented without a lot of visual flair.
Happens. You just see people.
It just happens. And yeah, I mean, it's also worth noting that they also announced that this is presented by the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover. It's
there's this like trifold reason why this ending I think it really succeeds is because the radio drama is all white people, and they do voices. So you have white people already writing over the literal very voices. We talked about the language, and the words are incredibly important to this story. You write over that. You screw the original voice, and then you use this horrible tragedy to sell cigarettes. That is like, I think it's really blatant when that comes in, and it's just like that is a great. You're like, oh,
and then you use this horrible tragedy to sell a movie.
Exactly.
Yes.
Where it's Scorsese saying, things. Look. Yes, well, look, they use this to sell people on the idea of the FBI, as like the book kind of does. It's the birth of the FBI, and they come in.
The fold is about the kind of co-option.
But the Lucky Strike product placement is so fantastic, coming from Scorsese, who made his first film with Apple TV Plus. Who he knew that this is a fucking thing, like Apple TV Plus saying, like, hey, you should subscribe to Apple TV Plus. We got the new Scorsese movie on here. He's like, I fucking know what you're doing, and I'm calling you out at the end of my movie.
Yeah, but hey, it wasn't profitable, so maybe they won't do it again.
Maybe he succeeded.
Maybe he succeeded. Anyway.
Maybe that's the reason he made it cost so much. So it was impossible for it to make its money back. So they wouldn't do it again.
He's playing 5D chess. He's playing 5D chess.
If there's any filmmakers playing 5D chess, it's Scorsese.
I do want to...
He made this movie so he could make that Super Bowl commercial about aliens.
Yeah, exactly.
I do want to talk about the ending a little bit more through a personal lens.
Okay.
Through the lens of obviously the first time watching the film having no context for it, it is a shock on your first viewing, I think, because it forces you to sort of recontextualize your own enjoyment of the movie.
Yes.
But I also think, to me, it made my second watch a lot more potent, as I found myself sort of actively challenging the idea of this as entertainment, which is why I am not bothered by the runtime, but I do think it's a point we should still discuss in the context of the review.
Okay.
Because with the knowledge of what the movie is trying to tell me ultimately about this notion of my own enjoyment of this piece of true crime fiction, essentially, and what the movie is also trying to tell me about the way we walk willingly oblivious through tragedy and genocide and rewritten history in our regular lives. As I was watching the movie on this second go around, I found myself paying a lot closer attention to the acts being committed. And that's why I found it to be very rewarding, even though I 100% admit that it does feel long. I'm never disengaged because I think that the film is so rich with subtext. Like the whole thing about language that I ended up pulling out this time.
Yep.
But I also think part of the reason that I am not bothered by the lengths is because this is just such an immaculately made movie. And we've talked about certain stylistic moves, but to talk about them in broad strokes as well, as I said to you last night, Tanner, I think that this is an exquisitely lit film.
Oh, yeah.
I think that...
Isn't it just so nice when you notice the lighting in a movie and you're like, oh, it's like really well lit.
When
like,
we're in Ernest and
happens.
Molly's bedroom and you're like, I can see all the sources of light. All the sources of light have light coming from. There's no just
where's
amorphous,
this nice,
where's the light coming
nice,
from?
Like, side light that I've got coming from. I'm never going to show you where that light's coming from.
Never going to show us.
It's fake.
It's a real mystery.
It's fake, yeah. This is movie magic,
It's
baby.
CGI.
So I think when you have such a master editing this film, and it's so beautifully lit, and the shots are not... I agree with you, Timo. I don't think the filmmaking draws attention to itself necessarily.
It doesn't insist upon itself.
No, it does not.
It's just so high quality that it's kind of transfixing, I think. I think this is a film just at such the highest level of technical craft, I just want to look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
You know what?
something that I really love is the production design as well.
Yeah.
There's one room in particular that I love. It's the Mason Lounge, the Mason, like the back room or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
sure.
I fucking love
Where
that
Ernest
room,
gets
dude.
the paddle.
Where he gets the spanking, and they're on like this marble chessboard looking thing, which of course has implications about him basically being a pawn in this whole plan.
Yeah.
And then we come back to it a second time when every controlling force in the film, every white controlling force in the film is crammed into one room.
Oh, I didn't realize it was the same room.
Yeah, all eyes on Ernest.
Yeah.
All eyes on Ernest in that moment. It's the can you spot the wolves in this picture moment from the trailer. And hey, Martin Scorsese might be a good director because both those sequences are fucking fantastically staged and blocked. Like the light sources and making sure you see every single person's face and how they're staggered into the back of the room. You can still see every person in there and be like, oh, that's the person from an hour and a half ago.
Yeah.
That's the person from at the beginning of the movie.
Or in the paddling moment, how De Niro has to force all the blocking. He literally has to tell Leo.
Ernest, yeah.
He has to tell Leo DiCaprio what to do. Sit up, kneel, and that power dynamic just gets expanded in that moment.
And yeah, they sit him down, and it's like this weird dark mahogany, and then the marble floor, and the sparse light fixtures throughout the entire room. I love it. I love the design of that room.
Yeah.
You know what else I love?
What
The
do you love?
score. I'm so happy that this film was
Son.
nominated for a score. You're right that it's not this needle droppy kind of, I guess, typical Scorsese score, but
I mean, there are needle drops in the film, but it's like contemporary, blues music, essentially.
Yeah, there's, it seems to me like there's like one or two songs.
This is not Elvis.
This is not Elvis.
There's like one or
There's
two.
no Doja Cat in Go to the Flower Moon.
The one or
Yes.
two songs of this film are like the evil theme, which is that like groovy
Dum,
boom boom.
dum, dum, dum.
And you just I hear that coming. I once I started to kind of get into the leitmotif of what that song meant, I would be like, ooh, these guys are up to no fucking good right now. We're doing some nefarious shit when that song starts playing.
Hey, it's the 2023 equivalent of the Imperial March.
Yeah.
I mean,
And it's just kind of,
This is
it's
coming- oh, go ahead.
repetitive.
Mhm.
It shows up all the time. And yet I love to hear it. It's like sometimes repetitive stuff is like, get that out of here. But this one, I was like, oh, like just give me more of it. I'm going to probably go listen to some more of the soundtrack because I just, that rhythm and just the sound of it is so well crafted and it's perfectly suited for the time setting of the film and the tone in which it shows up. Really well done.
I mean, Robbie Robertson, who's the late composer of this film, longtime friend of Martin Scorsese, the subject of The Last Waltz, the documentary that Scorsese directed about the band, has Native American heritage and sort of like infused that cultural music into sort of what he is known professionally for, which is like this 70s sort of rock, American rock influence. And I think it's a brilliant musing of those two styles of music that starts out, yes, with this very like sort of Scorsese style, like driving sort of rock thing. Like we don't have Rolling Stones, but we got Robbie Robertson on the beat here. And then over the course of the film, the score oftentimes drops out during very important scenes where you're just hanging on characters being interrogated or sort of trying to outsmart one another or knowing that they're being forced into doing something they don't want to do. And even when the score does come in the latter half of the film, it can feel quite ominous and not as like driving as like, oh yeah, Ernest Burkhart, he's getting off the train. Here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Anything else, gentlemen?
I've mostly shared my thoughts in the movie.
Yeah.
I have a final thought, but I kind of want to keep it to myself until the final
Okay,
moment.
all right, well.
Okay.
Okay.
I do have something that I want to mention.
Okay.
And it's, we talked about the ending of the film, which isn't actually the ending of the film.
Yeah.
The true final shot of the film is a modern day. We jump to the modern day, like Tucker was saying at the end of Zone of Interest. We jump to the modern day and see a top-down celebration by modern Osage people. And we sort of like pan up, we pedestal up and see rings and rings of them dancing around to music.
Just a great job. Beautifully composed.
Acts as a fantastic bookend to the film because the film opens on probably way farther in the past than the film is set. The Osage people sort of gathering together, lamenting that the white man is coming. They're going to force us out of where we live. They're going to force us to learn their language and teach our children their ways and so on and so forth. And a brilliant bookend to the film, as like, even despite what happened to them, even despite all the backstabbing, the lies, the murders, what have you, these people lived and continue to thrive and maintain and pass on their culture. Like a response to the very real fear that was sort of voiced at the very beginning of the film, and it's Scorsese at the end saying, yeah, these people do are alive still, and we have that like classic, slow fade to black. That's not abrupt. It's more elongated as a transition to the credits.
Mm-hmm. I think it's beautiful to me, also on like a meta level of Scorsese showing that he's also able to depict this joy and capture a joyous dimension of this culture, in addition to the sorrow that he shows in the rest of the film. I think it's, in my opinion, really essential to not only indict himself and the viewer and the production context of the movie, but then to end actually by illustrating that this joy does exist, and I think leaving you with that note is the important note, in that it kind of makes me treasure that scene very highly, and to some degree more highly than the rest of the film in some ways, in that it doesn't allow itself to get totally caught up in the sort of pessimism of its message ultimately. Because I do think that it's most productive to hit you with the pessimism and make you sit in that, but then allow the film to still end triumphantly. I do think that is important because it is a weird moment that we get into the Lucky Strike sequence. It's Ernest unable to face Molly and tell her what he's done. And then one of the greatest acting moments from Lily Gladstone in the entire movie, I think, she gives him this small smile and stands up and leaves.
Yep.
And so I think still allowing her and the Osage people to triumph in that final moment of the movie is essential to... I don't think telling the story right is how I want to phrase it,
Sure.
but I think it's the note.
Telling the story in the way that Martin's the only way Martin Scorsese can.
Yes.
I think is the way of putting it.
I agree.
Yeah, I think what's also cool about this movie, feeling very different from Martin Scorsese, is that there is, at least as far as I know, a very clear attention to the detail and reference and research and having cultural scholars there with the cast and crew and production design to make sure that the sequences that are focused on Osage culture are not a white guy's understanding of Osage culture. At least as far as I know, they're very, as far as I know, they're very accurate. And having the marriage sequence be not in a church under Catholic guise and with a big flower.
But there's also like this Catholic sort of influence running through the film. They go to Christian church a lot of times too. It's very interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
I like that.
Sure.
It feels different for Scorsese, who, for the vast majority of his, especially his popular films, of course, Martin Scorsese, as far as I know, not a mob boss, but working in Italian culture and New York culture and American culture.
Things that he knew.
That he's very familiar with. And so having this film have a different cultural edge to it, I think does feel very bold for him as a filmmaker, stepping outside of his comfort zone and letting, especially in those moments, it feel like someone else is directing that. And someone else is infusing this with a culture and perspective and ideas that you don't see in Martin Scorsese other films, because he's not that person. He's literally not that guy. He can't be every guy.
To speak in broad generalities before we type our scores in here, I think there is a lot, the themes that Scorsese typically tackles are also interestingly infused here. Things like religion that runs through a lot of Scorsese's real life and his films, things like forgiveness and, damnation, and can somebody truly commit horrible acts and still be considered a good person in the eyes of his fellow man and the eyes of a higher power. And then, of course, things that the movie's like literally driving the plot, like greed, wealth, masculinity, all of these things are all themes that run throughout Scorsese's films and are so brilliantly interpolated in Killers of the Flower Moon.
Mm-hmm. It's like taking all of the Scorsese ideas and making them more sensitive, more deft, and equally well executed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do have to say, in terms of where I ultimately have this film disconnect from me, is because obviously I basically said nothing but good things about this movie and the performances and the themes and stuff. And then I believe all that. I wouldn't be telling you if I didn't feel it was true.
Well, I thought you were a big lie the whole time.
Ernest Burkhart really convinced me that was the best way to go about my life.
Lie the whole time.
I want to make you love me, but in reality, I want to burn your Blu-ray collection.
No!
And poison your girlfriend. But is that there is a very massive chunk of this movie or a very big element of this movie that I feel that we've neglected, and I think that naturally so, in my opinion, because I think it's where the movie's at its weakest, which is the just litany of just fucking white guys that are doing crimes and doing things in the background, and there's just so many dudes, and I can't remember who knocked off that guy, and then what was that scene? You flash back to this, and they're meeting in the background and stuff, and I'm like, look, I understand that all this happened. I understand that leading up to these murders and showing the impact they have on Molly and on Ernest, on Hale, are interesting because of the character I talk about, or that I like and I find interesting in this film. But I do think that there's just so much time in this movie that I do not feel ends up rewarding me as a viewer, especially on a rewatch, to be compelled to remember every little bit that is not about our main three characters. Because there are just so many people and so many fucking scenes of people in the dark doing a crime and talking about whatever it is. I feel that is a weak element of this film that takes up so much of the screen time that disconnects me. Because I'm like, I'm not interested in remembering this set of criminal white guys, the fourth set that they've had to go to execute a crime. If just one or just two of those sets of, I feel, repetitive actions were trimmed out of this film's runtime, and maybe the runtime was then again more focused on giving Molly more screen time with her family. Okay, sure, I'd love to see those sequences. Maybe somewhat of her life was like before all of this went down, or a little bit more about Hale, because I think even though he's well acted and the character is great in the screen time they have, I do feel like there's an element missing from why his character is this way. What inspired him to be as murderous as he is? How was he treated as a child that made him like view other people this way? I think there is ways that this screen time for the people and the elements that I think are so strong could have been used on that were not the probably 30, 40 minutes of this film that are just, I think, going through the motions and hitting the beats over and over and over again of some guys go out in the dark and do some killing, and then we go back and we ponder on that for a bit. And
well, Tucker, we have to see the killers of the Flower Moon. We have to see them. That's what the movie's about.
It's really a modern day slasher. One of the first nominated.
I mean, Tucker, I hear what you're saying, and it's a lot of movie. I'm not going to pretend like Killers of the Flower Moon isn't 3.5 hours long, and that's a long movie. It ultimately just comes down to, like, does it hook you, does it grab you, or does it not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I especially felt all this on my second watch because, as I mentioned at the beginning, knowing what was going to happen, who was going to die, what the twist or secret, whatever, of Hale's his intentions, and then knowing the court case was coming at the end, I really felt like there was nothing for me to get even more deeply interested in because I knew where it ended up. And I don't usually feel that when I watch films. I think it really was just the length of this movie. And it felt like I was going through the motions, waiting to get to this next scene that I enjoyed, where I could see Lily Gladstone and Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro give an amazing performance. But there's too much Killers of the Flower Moon for me to genuinely love Killers of the Flower Moon. I love so many elements of it, but the film takes so long to get to the elements that I find incredibly engaging. Not that they aren't spread out across the film, but in between those, I'm like, I don't care about this. And frankly, because I feel that the movie is at different tiers of quality and engagement when it is focusing on our main characters versus not, I feel it doesn't give me much of a reason to want to care about the elements that aren't about our main characters. And so with such a big chunk of the film that continually pushes me away and distances me from the character, so even by the end of the film, I'm way less interested in it than I was at the beginning. I do feel that is just a symptom of length, and I'm not a size queen.
As a resident long.
I was just so intently listening. You're like, okay, I'm considering Tucker's points here, and then you just hit me with the size queen thing. Sorry, continue, Timo.
As a self-professed long movie enjoyer, this is my little piece that I was holding back. I think that this movie is not supposed to be enjoyed. That this is not a movie that you're supposed to be rewarded by.
Weird defense of the movie.
It's like,
I agree.
No, you're not supposed to like this one.
No, I agree. Keep going. I agree.
You are supposed to like this movie, but I don't exactly think you're supposed to like watching this movie. I think that, like, because of what we've talked, I think that there's like lots of like filmmaking elements.
And the performance should have been worse.
Sorry. Okay.
That all these things are leading to this ending that is the indictment of your own enjoyment of the film. And so
I didn't enjoy it, so I'm not part of that.
Well, I remember getting to the end of the film and trying to, like, put my thoughts together about it. And I was like, what, did I enjoy watching this? And I thought, no, but I was really interested by it. And I was very much like in and thinking about it and being engaged by it. And so my kind of wrap up of this film is that it's a rewarding watch when you like get to the realization of how you were supposed to not really like watching it. I don't know. That sounds crazy. Honestly, I think that's kind of maybe not exactly the best way I can phrase it, but like the very act of viewing this film is somewhat incriminating upon yourself. If you like watching crime thrillers, and if you like watching this stuff, you're like,
Everyone go give it a half star so you're not a fucking asshole.
Hey, I enjoyed watching it, and they indicted me.
all right, let's give it a score.
Go ahead.
I'll
go
just say
ahead.
to give my final thoughts. I agree with you, Timo. It's a little bit like the discourse that happened on a game, and people know it, called The Last of Us Part 2. That
Well-known game.
Yeah, if you're one of our many viewers who are like middle-aged and don't play video games,
Yeah.
essentially it is a very long, very, very dour experience.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people talking about whether or not the act of playing a video game needs to be fun. And I think that it's a conversation that's interesting and exciting to have in any medium, wherein essentially it boils down to don't replace fun for enjoyment or engagement or whatever, and just realize that the overarching prompt is, can we be provoked by these medias in different ways? And like, can they provoke different types of responses that we as viewers find compelling? And I agree with you, Timo. I think that this movie is deeply engrossing to me, not necessarily for the reason why a lot of my favorite movies are, because I don't have very good taste. And when I
Finally, something we can agree on.
and when I say that Batman versus Superman: Dawn of Justice is one of my favorite movies, it's obviously not for the same reasons that Killers of the Flower Moon is in my opinion, one of the greatest films I've experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Because what this offers to me is a real intellectual challenge that I feel like I have to rise to when I watch it again.
Yeah, like second grade level.
I would show this to a second grader, of course.
And I think that I agree with your use of
Film's nap
rewarding. I agree with your use of rewarding, Timo. I think this is, for me, a deeply intellectually rewarding film, because it's one that I think both holds the viewer at a distance and in contempt, but also brings you in through the filmmaking and through some real heart in our performances. I think it's very complicated. But my score is uncomplicated.
That's true.
I have to say.
All right, let's give this thing a score.
Let's give it a score. Well, I'm punching in some numbers. 3, 2, 1, go! Okay, wow. We have a score. It is 9.2. Just
Wowie zowie.
0.1 below Past Life. So it will be
A tenth of a point almost.
number 2 film on the list.
Well,
The point breakdown is Tucker gave it a 7.1. I gave it a 9.5. And then the two gentlemen on the side there, Tanner and Abram, both gave it a 10.0. So that puts, well, there's a number of films that have gotten a 10, but there's 3 films on our list that have received at least one 10.0 vote from one of us. But Killers of the Flower Moon at the number 2 spot on our list of the best films, or the best picture nominees. Best films of last year. We all know that the Academy doesn't do that, so it's okay.
I think this does enter into a very, very, very small crop of films we've reviewed across the entirety of the show nominees, including to get multiple 10s.
yeah.
There are some, but there are very, very few. And this one did get 2.
Yeah. It's also because I've decided, especially if we compare it to like initially doing the best picture winners, I'm less stingy with my 10s, I feel. Now, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that this group of movies
Movies are better.
New movies are better, and I agree with that.
This group of nominees for me has an uncharacteristically greater number of movies that I think are basically perfect.
Yeah.
So
It's a pretty good year.
We might be getting to another one here pretty quick. We might be getting to another one.
Well,
No.
what is
I'm
coming
not talking about
up
that one.
next? What is coming up next, Tanner?
Next, we are closing off having seen all the Best Picture nominees for one Abram Buhner, that is.
yes.
We are watching a Netflix film. This one is available on Netflix. It is a film that we have already reviewed, actually.
Mhm.
It is the film directed by Bradley Cooper, starring Bradley Cooper and Carey Mulligan.
Without the nose of Bradley Cooper.
Maestro.
It's in there somewhere.
It's
Hidden.
under there.
It's hidden.
Maestro.
yeah, I'm 9 for 10. I'll be 10 for 10
Yeah.
after Maestro.
I'm 10 for
You can
10
get all
as
of
of
10.
today.
Oh, congratulations,
There we go.
I've
Timo.
seen them all. Okay.
Yep. All right.
Maestro. I'm excited to have a Quest discussion of this because we did a review, but we were a bit more pulp bit more pop about it, and I want to get in. I want to get into that
Yeah.
little.
Maybe a little bit more pop punk about it,
wanna-
weren't we?
avant-garde in our interpretation, and
I heard.
yes,
Classic French pronunciation.
Maestro. It's been a minute. It's been a month, maybe 2 months since I saw it. So
2 months,
It'll,
yeah.
it'll be 2 months.
yeah, I'm gonna rewatch it to just see if I have a new opinion. And well, if you keep watching Backlot Banter, next episode you'll get to find out what my new
Holy
opinion of Maestro is, as well as our
Brand
other
spanking new opinion by Timo Nelson.
hot off the press. Okay,
Uh-huh.
as I always say, stay warm, keep cool. We'll see you next time. Peace.